Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Alter. I'm one of the co-founders of Tech for Campaigns and CEO. Welcome to our first all hands of 2019. We did a lot of these in 2018, but this is our first 2019 all hands. We're really excited to have you all here and talk a little bit about, the recap of what we've done so far, where we're going, and have Cindy and Zach, who are two of our awesome volunteers, talk about the huge ads postmortem project that they sort of co-led. If you haven't seen it, it was covered in the New York Times and it's plastered across our website. So we'll get right into it. In case you're not familiar with some of the statistics, TFC is really building the permanent digital arm for centrist and progressives. I think a lot of people know us as being able to be the talent arm and provide talent and volunteers, and that's true. We have now over 10,000 highly skilled volunteers recruited. 56% of you guys are actually totally new to politics, which is amazing. In the last 2 years, and this is actually pre-2019, we worked directly with 133 campaigns on over 250 digital projects. So that in itself is awesome, but actually in 2018, we grew ×6. And a question we get asked a lot is, how do we know if people are happy? We actually do measure NPS. So campaign NPS is about 87, which if you're following NPS is quite high. And some of the big news for 2019, where actually, to preempt the question, there are many elections, including some yesterday, is that we were chosen as the primary digital provider in Virginia. Virginia is the only statewide election in 2019 that's flippable. So there's 4 statewide elections in 2019, Virginia, New Jersey, Louisiana, Mississippi. And Virginia is the only one that where the House and Senate actually are both flippable. And we'll be running all digital and technology for the Virginia House of Delegates. We actually already are 16 campaigns and more coming. The other part is we've built a lot of tools and playbooks that are lasting, that come from 2018, but are going to last way beyond 2018. Alex can talk a little bit about this, but the benefit of working on so many campaigns at once is that we get amazing learnings, and we've had teams looking across those campaigns. You'll hear from some today. Across those projects on what we learned, and we synthesize those into playbooks. We've also built several tools that have helped not only us scale, but that we can use across campaigns. So it's really the technology plus the talent that TFC is leveraging to scale and grow even bigger in 2019, 2020. Here's just some of the big headline results from our work in 2018. As you can see, Greg likes to move the cursor for some reason, but we had work across 22 states, but some of the big highlights, Texas was one of the biggest Democratic pickups since the 1960s. 9 of our 9 Texas State House races won. Florida, 6 wins, 5 of them were flips. We helped break super majorities in the Pennsylvania Senate and the Michigan Senate, which were both record-breaking years for them. The Maine State Senate flipped in a big congressional race, which at the time was actually being called the biggest upset of the night, was Kendra Horn in Oklahoma 5. She's the first Democratic victory there since 1975. I think the first female Congress member there ever. So just some top level amazing results from 2018. And this is how things have changed. I think you've probably seen this map of 2017. If you've been on previous Tech for Campaigns All Hands. And, you know, it's somewhat grim, but we did make headway in 2018. There's still a long way to go. Basically from something you can't see on here, but from 2009 to 2018, we gained back about a third of the seats we had lost. So the net gain of about 13 bodies, meaning state houses or state senates, were gained, including Maine and a couple others. But there's still obviously a ton of work to do. And to even just get back to the 2008 levels. The other reason, and if I'm being a broken record, so be it, but the other reason that 2020 is so important, I'm sure you started to hear about the census that will be happening in 2020. With the census comes congressional redistricting, and it's actually one of the reasons that we focus on states is the state legislatures are responsible for drawing the lines at the federal level. So who's ever in control in most states after the 2020 elections will be drawing the lines at the federal level. Who you elect at the federal level has no bearing on drawing their own lines, actually. It's only the state legislators, in some cases independent commissions, but independent is usually in quotes. So those things are just incredibly, incredibly important and will determine political outcomes for minimum the next decade. So there's just a ton riding on 2020. And at this point, I want to hand it over to Alex to talk a little bit about what we're focusing on this year and Virginia.
Great. So as Jessica mentioned, there are lots of elections this year. I think we're all really focused on, you know, who has hauled in the most cash at the presidential level, which is for sure important, but we do not want to forget about really, really critical elections that are happening in 2019. As Jessica mentioned, one of those most critical elections is Virginia. So it is a, you know, quote unquote, flippable state at pretty much every level. So right now, many of you probably know that the governor is a Democrat. There are senators who are Democrats, but the House and Senate at the state legislative level are both held by Republicans. So I'll talk about sort of what the balance of power looks like shortly, but super, super important to focus on Virginia this year, which is why as an organization, we are doing almost all of our projects in Virginia. So there are 40 state Senate seats up for election, and 40 is all of the state Senate seats in Virginia. The last election was in 2015. They're up every 4 years. And there are 100 House of Delegates seats. The House of Delegates is just the state house. It means the same thing in Virginia, which again is every single House of Delegates seat. So the last election was in 2017, and I'll talk about that in a second. But very quickly, again, Virginia is one of those states where district lines get drawn by the General Assembly. And so it is so important to have that be majority Democrat. So in 2017, as I mentioned, the House of Delegates held their election. Every single seat was, you know, effectively up for grabs, even if Democrats didn't run in heavily Republican districts. And every vote truly, truly mattered. So there were 3 candidates in the House of Delegates race that lost by less than 200 votes, including Shelley Simons, who basically lost by 1 vote. There was a recount because it was so close. They found that the vote was tied, and so by law, they decided to basically draw a name out of a hat, and she did not win that lottery. So, you know, probably even more important than every vote mattering is just what happened when the Democrats did not, they won a bunch of seats. They actually grabbed a ton of seats. So I think they flipped 15 seats in the House in 2017, but they didn't get it to the majority. And so while they were able to do some pretty successful things and pass some bipartisan legislation, including, you know, Medicaid expansion, there were things that didn't happen because they didn't hold the majority, and they don't hold the majority now, including things like the Equal Rights Amendment not passing. So here is what things look like today and what we're hoping to change in November. So on the left, you can see the current state Senate balance of power. Basically, the Republicans hold 2 seats more than the Democrats, and same at the House of Delegates level. So it is really, really, really close. And as you just saw, every vote really does matter. Every Facebook ad matters, every website matters, every email matters, every dollar matters. And if they win the majorities, of course, they're still working on their statewide platform, and each candidate has their own key issues. But areas of focus for the Democrats will be education, healthcare, jobs, and hopefully getting that equal rights legislation passed. So we are not waiting until November to start helping candidates. One thing that we have found in past years is that it is really critical to get started early. We are already working with 21 different partners in Virginia, so individual candidates, individual campaigns, as well as the caucuses there. We have 22 projects that are either completed or underway, and we expect to do about 70 projects in total in 2019 in Virginia. So here's a sort of smattering of candidates that we are already working with or have already worked with. Lots of websites right now, but also kicking off a bunch of email marketing and email fundraising programs, as well as ads projects. So here's just a couple examples of projects that have already launched or are currently live. We've been building a ton of websites, and by we, of course, I mean our volunteer teams. Been running quite a large number of ads already. So especially for the caucuses, we're really focused on basically getting the good word out there for good things that are happening, as opposed to having the media narrative focus on all the not so great things that are happening at the Virginia executive level. And on the right side, you can see an example of an email that is part of an email fundraising program going on right now. There's a TFC team running email fundraising for Amy Loffer, who's running for state senate in Virginia. They've already raised $3,000. They've only been running for a couple of weeks. So I'm really excited to see what all of our teams can do, especially because we are getting started so early. These teams are all using playbooks that either were in existence and or have been refreshed, or templates that were in existence and or have been rebuilt based on all of the things that we learned last cycle and continue to learn. So we just launched a couple of new website templates that teams are working with so that they can customize things more easily. We are rolling out new email templates very shortly so that teams can optimize their emails and keep them consistent. And then lest you think we've totally forgotten about other states. We have not completely forgotten about them. Obviously, Virginia is so important to focus on because it is just a huge opportunity for Democrats. But there are a number of other states that we're sort of poking around in. There are a lot of political and operational issues to work through in some of the other states. Virginia has a particularly well coordinated House of Delegates and state Senate. So we are doing a couple of projects in these other states, and we'll continue to look for opportunities, but we're, again, very, very heavily focused on Virginia in 2019. So I'll pass it over to Greg to talk a little more about the ads postmortem, which was one of the big projects that came out of 2018, and we are using the output of to inform a lot of the projects that we are running this year in Virginia.
All right. Hello, everyone. So one of the big things that goes into those playbooks are not only like how to get started in the right way and what do all these funny political terms mean, but what are the best practices that have been observed and discovered by past TFC teams, and what's really the state of the political world. And so obviously a big area of our focus is on digital advertising. One of the fun benefits of digital advertising is that it comes out with a lot of data. And we wanted to look at that data from both the perspective of the overall political ecosystem and also the experiences that we had with the 57 different ad projects that we ran in 2018. And so the product of that very large effort across two or three different teams was the 2018 Political Digital Advertising Report. And that was released a couple weeks ago and certainly had some awesome coverage, like Jessica mentioned at the top. New York Times and Fast Company and Politico, and even in some even more, political industry publications. And it really told two sides of one story, which is what does political digital advertising look like in 2018? In 2016, it kind of rocketed to fame and became almost notorious through some of the news media. But we wanted to make sure that we did a really quantitative look at both the overall state of the ecosystem and what did we learn from our experiences. So we have two folks from those teams. First person will be Cindy Wang, who led the project to label, structure, research all the data that went into the overall ecosystem. And also Zach Winston, who's a data scientist who worked on the campaign learning side. So Cindy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
So Cindy and I worked really closely over the past month or so, in addition to 15 other volunteers or so, to really digest this data. So Facebook and Google release political spend data. So they tell you how much they spend, they tell you what their name was, but they don't tell you anything else. And so Cindy and her team really added a lot of richness to this data, researching literally thousands of advertisers to not just see what the name of this page was, which can be as generic as literally Coloradans for Colorado, but what party are they from, what state are they in, state or federal, are they a political action committee, or are they a campaign, or are they a corporation? So I just want to talk to Cindy briefly about what her experience is and what she learned. So Cindy, do you want to give a brief introduction to kind of your background and what made it relevant to this project?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so as a day job, I'm a program manager for a consumer internet company focusing on knowledge graph and the natural language based services around it. In a past life, I also worked on web scale personalized ads. So when this project came up, and it really piqued my interest in both the ad aspect and the data aspect. And in the real world, in my day-to-day life, usually I deal with a lot of data. They're very messy. It's always interesting and challenging. So this is really a perfect project for me. Yeah. Sorry, Greg.
I was going to say that's a great segue into how, because you basically started with a couple of big spreadsheets and then made everything happen from there. So it'd be kind of interesting to hear how you broke down the problem and what happened.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So what we saw is Facebook has about 50,000 over 2018 election cycle had 50,000 advertisers. And there's no way we can manually label that many advertisers. So we took a step and say, okay, so what is the 80, you use the typical Pareto chart, what is the 20% that gets you 80% of the outcome, right? So we took a step and realized about at about 2,000 advertisers that they cover about 80%, close to 80% of the total ad spend. So we decided to take those 2,000 and divide it amongst all the data labeling team members, about 10 of them. So each one of them were able to take 200 and really research on each one of them and label all the advertiser type and party affiliation, geography, and et cetera, like what Greg mentioned. And of course we had to go back, because data is messy, and we had to go back relabeling a lot of them. So it's a very iterative process. And the team is great. They stepped up. Every time we needed someone will always volunteer for it. Doesn't matter whether it's a weekend or nighttime.
That is true. And I guess since you are now intimately familiar with all these political advertisers, what surprised you about, given your background?
Yeah, so it actually surprised me that at the end, the result is that digital ad spend is still so small. And I would imagine with all the noise about digital ads, I thought it would be at least 20% of media spend for all these campaigns, right? Turns out on average, it's only under 7%, under 7%, which is very surprising. The other thing that I'm actually I'm surprised, but it shouldn't be, is the state legislatures, these races spend so little money on advertising. We couldn't even get them to the 2,000, the top 2,000, right? We had to crawl down to 10,000 because the state house oftentimes spent at the scale of about a few $100s.
Yeah.
And the state senate only $2,000-3,000. So it's actually very minimal. So it tells you there's a lot of room that you can actually grow in that area, right?
That is absolutely true. Cool. So I don't want to. Oh yeah. So that's very apt because the next slide is actually an illustration of that fact. And one of the really I guess compelling ways to look at this overall landscape is yes, there's Donald Trumps and there's Beddoes who spend tons and tons of money. They really do. But the vast majority of the average campaign, even at the U.S. Senate level, so these are probably the highest end, some of the highest end campaigns out there, their overall investment when you adjust for things outside of Facebook and Google is still at the 7 to 4% level on campaigns. And you saw some super PACs spend more than that, but even the higher super PAC spend level really pales in comparison to what the Trump campaign spent in 2016 on digital advertising, and the 54% that the overall US ad industry spends on digital advertising. I think a lot of our volunteers are those folks spending those budgets on the commercial side, and coming over to the political side is always, to be politically it's a little bit of an adjustment. So I think these metrics really put what Cindy described into sort of stark relief. But cool. Donna, is anything else you'd like to add, Cindy?
No, it's a fantastic experience, and I cannot believe with the volunteer of 15 people, we actually pulled this through in 2 or 3 weeks, right? Yeah. It was a great experience for, at least I speak for myself and the data visualization team and the labeling team.
It was truly an awesome effort, and people were really, really awesome. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So next I'll talk about the Ads Analytics project, which was really about, again, what happened with our campaigns. There are 57 campaigns ranging from statewide campaigns to those state house campaigns and state senate campaigns that Cindy mentioned. So bring on Zach, who's a data scientist who worked on this project, to really kind of do a similar thing where we were hungry for insights. We wanted to discover what happened. We wanted to quantify things that we had, sort of seen working kind of with our own eyes. And so Zach, Jonathan, Amy, and Kevin, and Anela really, dive really deeply into that data. So Zach, you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, so my background, I'm currently a data scientist at Stitch Fix working on marketing problems. That's pretty related to this project. And the way the team worked together was, so Jonathan, I know, was the team lead, and then Amy and I were the 2 data scientists on this, and then we had Kevin, who is a marketing expert. And the way that Amy and I split up the project is Amy did a lot of the data processing, and she did some initial stabs at the best practices, and also for the benchmark. So just for a little bit of context there, we had 2 deliverables for this project. We had benchmarks, which is at certain points in the for different types of campaigns, at certain points in the campaign, what should the performance of the campaign look like from an ad spend perspective. So Amy did a lot of that work. And then my role, and Ella helped finish at the end, was about what are some of the best practices that campaigns could use. And on the other slide, there was a little bit about selfies being better than other types of videos. Yeah.
There's a good segue.
And so that was sort of the way the team worked, and it was quite a bit of work. And yeah, it went for what, 4 months, Greg? Was it? Remember that?
There was a little lingering, but I think the bulk of it was right after the election in the sort of the holiday period.
Yeah.
I guess, given that you work on marketing problems or your day job, like, was there something surprising about this data set that you saw?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest thing is with a lot of these campaigns, you said it was, how many, was it 57? Was that the right number?
Yeah, 57.
Yeah. So this coordination problem, right? So a lot of these campaigns, if they were to run A/B tests, it would be very, very hard for them to measure anything. And it's very, very difficult to coordinate. And so in my professional life, it's mostly about doing A/B tests to try and understand the performance of these things. And that's not really an option. And so it makes things a lot more challenging.
And this is sort of a not quite the same, but it's a higher level aggregate analysis that hopes to take a lot of these little lessons and bring them together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks for all the hard work on this project and to the team as well. And so I think, if you haven't seen the 2018 Ads Postmortem Report, check it out. It's on our website at the top, or I'm sure you could, it's also in the chat. So either way, check it out. If you have any questions, let us know. So I think we'll now open up to Q&A. There's a little bit of you can use the Zoom feature or the chat. But if you have anything, go ahead and enter it.
One thing I want to make sure that people understand from the work, that Zach did, Zach and his team did, is that all of the lessons that we learned, some of them in the report, we sort of boiled them down to like the top 7, but all of the lessons learned, all those benchmarks, those now also live in a playbook that we call the Digital Ads Playbook, that any volunteer or team member that starts an ads project gets access to. So it's not just about doing a study and publishing it, although that's nice, but it's actually in taking these learnings back and changing what we're doing on campaigns, and being able to go to campaigns and say, hey, it turns out like older Americans 55 plus are clicking on ads at a rate of 3 times of younger Americans. I know you have an older district. This is why you should be on digital there. So it's both been really helpful as we talk to campaigns, but also lives on and helps all of you guys and all of the other volunteers as they take on new ad projects. We have the same thing for email, the same thing for texting in 2019 and 2020. And that's stuff that we do all the time. We're not always publishing it, but we're constantly looking at what's happening and trying to learn from it.
Cool. We have a question from Virginia that Alex might be best suited to answer.
Sorry, I thought Greg was saying a question about the state of Virginia, but it is actually a participant named Virginia. Hello, Virginia. That's why I was so confused. So the ratio of volunteers to opportunities. We do certainly have imbalance on certain types of projects. So we just have a lot of interest in software projects. So like, often tens of people apply, sometimes like 50 people will apply for a software project because they're just rarer. Whereas we do, tons and tons of websites and email marketing and ads projects. And so, we're typically able to fill those pretty easily, but we don't have a massive surplus of folks. You've probably seen in our newsletter that we post projects that are sort of highlighted projects. But what we do to recruit volunteers for most of our projects is reach out individually to folks that are the right fit. So we will look through our entire volunteer base. We have a tool that we've built internally to find volunteers that have the skill set that matches the type of project that we are staffing at any given time. And we'll basically reach out one-on-one. We have a staffing team that does that. And so it really just depends on the project and the type of skills that we're looking for.
Any other questions? All right. So Kate just asked, was under the impression most Republican campaigns were outspending on digital, but the report showed Dems at 7%, Republicans at 4%. No, so you're not misunderstanding. So it's one of the things that happened in the ecosystem was, well, Trump does spend a lot. And so Trump, as a part of the Republican Party, is like a huge campaign. And influences those overall figures. But Democrats had kind of a rude awakening in 2016, and there's a lot of work left to do. But they got off the bench, and so we're still talking about like little numbers, like 4 to 7%, when the overall commercial industry is at 54. So, and it also, it depends on where you're looking and all sorts of other things. But both folks are, really need to be spending more to be able to communicate with those folks. And the second question about, is there concern that publishing the data findings could be utilized by Republican campaigns, is that I think a lot of this stuff we've kept a lot for the playbooks that are not open to the public. So a lot of the more nitty gritty, findings are in our playbooks and not part of the published report. And I think the overall value to the ecosystem was greater from making sure that nobody had to sign up under a password or get on a certain email list, and that would just sort of naturally diminish the reach of the report in any context. And so we decided that to go broad with it would ensure a broader audience, which would have a greater overall effect. Because the message about budget levels is really something that's universal, and it's easy to talk about, and it's a lot harder to do. You have anything else to add?
Yeah. I would just say that we don't feel like anything that we actually published, and obviously we were thoughtful about it, is something that practitioners don't know. So it's really for candidates and higher level campaign managers who either aren't getting the best advice or don't have access to understand that it's being underinvested in, and to dispel some of the myths out there that you need super produced video versus selfie video, or that waiting till the end is okay. So we don't feel like we publish things that nobody knows. We feel like we publish things that practitioners probably know, and that Republican or Democrat, but that actually it's the candidates and campaign managers and other people that really need to know it. And at the end of the day, like anything else, it's always about execution.
Switch back over, talk about which candidates.
I can answer this from Anthony. How do you choose which candidates to help? Do they come to you, or do you go to them? At the state level, at the state legislative level, we go to them in the sense that we are always closely partnered with the state house and or state Senate caucus. We do not go into any state without that partnership. It's pretty critical. And we decide with them which campaigns to help. And obviously the campaigns have to still say yes, but they mostly do. And there's a bit of analytical and a bit of qualitative input. On the analytical side, we actually do have another team that has built a model where we rank every single state district in every single state. That's how we pick the states. And then we'll show that model to caucuses, and they'll add their qualitative knowledge, because it doesn't take into account how the candidate is running. It only takes into account historical data. And then based on that, we'll get introduced to the candidates. At the federal or statewide level, it really varies. Sometimes they come to us and sometimes we go to them. But at the state legislative level, we're only focused on flipping bodies or changing major outcomes of those bodies. So it could be flipping, and it could be like defending, and it could be making sure that a supermajority gets broken. So we would never go in and help one campaign in one state at the state level.
Cool.
Wow, now we're getting lots. Are there going to be campaigns in Texas for the upcoming elections? Since I'm unmuted, I'll just keep talking. There will be campaigns in Texas, but that won't start till 2020, to be honest. Is likely, maybe late 2019, a couple. But if you want to get involved in 2019, Virginia, probably a little bit Louisiana, a little bit Mississippi, maybe some gubernatorial, but these races do not gear up. They don't gear up in 2019, really. So we'll probably work back in Texas again, and maybe there'll be some caucus level projects, but we doubt there'll be tons at the Texas level before 2020. Okay, from Paul. We've been helping House, Senate caucuses, but is there any interest in helping local Democratic clubs with websites? I'll let Greg or Alex take that.
Hey, Paul. So we have to sort of make our bets for where the resources that we have, which, like you asked offline, of is both volunteer type people and staff, can make the best impact. And so we've chosen state legislatures to focus on the because of the sort of impact that they can have across the state and how neglected they have been over the past few years. So I think over time we'd love to get to a place where the website template is easy enough that people can pick it up and use it without much help. But right now our template's really optimized for active campaigns that sort of have a certain size and requires work. And so we have to place that work in the right place. But yes, frequently a lot of the county Democratic Party websites certainly do need help. And there's commercial options like Squarespace that can do a good job for sort of getting something up there that looks nice and is professional. For the large body of TFC, you don't have to name the state. Okay.
So the next question is, for the large body of TFC volunteers not in in-state election areas, what's the best way you can be helpful for the next 2 years? Is there anything else you can contribute other than looking out for volunteer opportunities? So you do not need to be in the state to volunteer for a project. You can volunteer on any project, no matter where you live. I actually think it's one of the great strengths of TFC teams that we have a diversity of folks on these projects, even though it can occasionally make scheduling harder when folks are across different time zones. So don't hesitate to apply, even if you don't live in Virginia. We love folks from everywhere. I will also say that if you are eager to help, in addition to the projects that you see in our newsletter, or in addition to a project that you get recruited for, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Alex, at techforcampaigns.org. We're always doing sort of additional projects that you don't see in the newsletter. So building dashboards, building software for campaigns and for caucuses that are more, so I guess, secret projects that we do. And so again, if you really want to contribute extra hours, don't hesitate to reach out.
So Mary's question about the mobile apps, the effectiveness of live events, there probably is. I think we're concentrating on the things that we've outlined of how campaigns can communicate and operate effectively over large scale. But certainly there's a whole sort of cottage industry of democratic political technology, and one of them might want to take a run at how to make those events as effective as possible. The second question is from Kathy about training resources. Whenever anyone's staffed on a TFC project, we will basically provide everybody with an automatic message about every single resource that we have available. And a lot of the resources are really like you can't separate them from the project very easily because it's designed to be as helpful as it can be in that specific context. So when you get staffed on a project, you'll have training resources that are available. Paul, can we organize a TFC-wide NGP van training session? That's a pretty good idea, I think. We're building out our, so for people who don't know what NGP van is the sort of like usual democratic software that most campaigns out of California use for their fundraising tracking and their field activity as campaigns. So how many doors do you knock on, phone calls you make, that kind of thing. I know from background that Paul is asking specifically about NGP's email program. And so we are, as we figure out the best practices, building out in our new wiki system more NGP specific content about how to do things, but certainly can do more of that, and that's a great suggestion. So I think at 6:16 we might be on time to wrap this up. Thanks everybody for joining. And catching on. I'll give you guys.
Yeah, okay. I'm for some reason not on video, but
my computer.
Okay. No, I don't want to interrupt Greg, but I just want to say thank you to all of the volunteers, in particular on this call. Thank you so much, Cindy, Zach, and your teams that worked so hard to not only do the work, but produce a report that I think is getting a ton of attention and opening people's eyes to what is going on. So we're just extraordinarily grateful for that. And there's a ton of work ahead. As Alex said, 2020 presidential races tend to eat up all the airtime, but there are just incredibly, incredibly important races that you can make a marked impact on both in 2019 and 2020 that aren't those races. So just remember that those races are not getting the same amount of attention, but they're quite strategic, and so you can make an even an outsized impact. So thank you guys so much. We'll keep doing these all hands, and if you have other feedback, you're welcome to send it our way. Have an amazing night.
Bye-bye.